All right. This is something I kind of wanted to talk about here. As I said, this channel kind of goes over not just astrology specifically or masculinity and femininity specifically, but also kind of talks about certain examples that you see in say, normal everyday life that kind of shows you a little bit about how these houses in astrology might work, or maybe how the planets might work, or certain signs. And so yesterday was a very interesting, day altogether in terms of the sports world. This is being recorded Monday, January 24th, which means we had a weekend of divisional games of the NFL. And there was a game yesterday between the Kansas City Chiefs and the Buffalo Bills that was a lot of fun to watch. A lot of back and forth, a lot of, hey, you see two young rising stars in the NFL that kind of define where the NFL is going to be in the future. So this thing got a ton of views. It went to overtime. Josh Allen was making spectacular plays. Patrick Mahomes was making spectacular plays. And you're kind of sitting back and saying, hey, well, this is riveting. Who's going to win it? But it goes overtime. And in overtime, they have the rule where it's kind of a quasi-sudden death format, where when you go to overtime, you flip a coin. Whoever wins that toss gets to choose whether they defer or receive. They will always receive, then defer. If that team goes ahead and scores the first touchdown, the game's over. But if they don't score that touchdown, that the opposing team can win with just a field goal. And so the purpose of this was basically it's there to emphasize not so much all three of the phases of the sport, which is offense, defense, and special teams. It's really there to kind of give every single one equal importance, right? And at that moment, and maybe even like utmost importance, right? And so the Kansas City Chiefs win the toss, and they receive, march down the field, and score the touchdown, win the game. And everyone's sitting there looking at Josh Allen and saying, well, this isn't fair. Like, this is just blatantly unfair. These rules are terrible. And so how do we make sense of this? Like, because this is an interesting question. Is there validity? And where do we see validity with regards to this? And I personally find it a little interesting. And this, again, these videos are there for discussion purposes, because I tend to have ideas that don't really run with the mainstream of any way, shape, or form. And this has been one of those things where I am so vehemently in love with the overtime rules, where everyone else isn't. They kind of want the maybe some kind of format that more closely resembles potentially college, where they start, I think, on the 10 or the 20-yard line, and they have a set of downs to either score a touchdown or kick a field goal, and then the opposing team does the same, which is fair, right? It's a fair way of doing it. You get equal chances. Problem with that format is it does tend to, it can drag on. You have 4 overtime, 5 overtime, and it goes on for a while, and it becomes less exciting for me as a fan, watching it and seeing it over and over and over again, where you're kind of like, okay, then we're just waiting for someone to make a mistake. Who's going to make the first mistake rather than who's going to, make the big play. And, and of course it kind of ignores special teams a little bit, whereas in this instance, people are coming out and they're saying, okay, hey, why doesn't Josh Allen get a chance? And the response is very simple, because defense matters too, right? And that's number one. And people kind of just, they get angry about it, because they're like, no, that's not the game. That's not the game today. Because first of all, they're kind of making a mistake, which is kind of the NFL's fault. And the NFL has made everything about quarterbacks. We don't talk about teams anymore. We talk about Aaron Rodgers, and the Green Bay Packers. We talk about Tom Brady and the New England Patriots, or the or the Tampa Bay Buccaneers as it is today. It's Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs, et cetera, et cetera. But of course, that's not the actual game. The actual game is, you have a team, I think like 56 total players, if I remember correctly, but there's 11 on each, side of the field at all times. In other words, there's more than just the quarterback, We tend to forget that because the NFL likes to sensationalize everything. But what's important here is what happens when you make it about a single person. This, because you have to listen to it, and people are going, hey, this single person got something that was wrong he was wronged in some way. And you're sitting there going, well, okay, why was he wrong? Oh, because, well, Kansas City doesn't have a great defense. Well, sure, but, the reality is we have to determine a winner, right? Well, it's just not fair. It's not fair to Josh Allen, and it simply doesn't feel right. And so from an esoteric standpoint, what are we speaking towards? And you can't help but notice that there is a bit of a conflict here, and I would call it a squared conflict. A conflict. When you're comparing 1 to 1 in terms of fairness, that's kind of Libra. That's your classic scales. It's about relationships. If this person gets to have this person gets to have that. In general, right now, we are entering into the age of Aquarius. We're starting to see the aspects of it. And one of the points that actually this is originally from Astrolada, who has a great video on this, talking about the age of Aquarius. And when you look at the age of Aquarius, you take a look at Aquarius as sort of the logna or the ascendant of the age, and so Aquarius is the logna of the age, which makes the 9th house in Libra. And so what does that mean? Well, a lot of our higher mind, and this is is now going to be obsessed with equality, because Libra isn't so much about equity as it is equality. It's always about relationships, equality in relationships, equality in outcomes. And the 9th house is our higher mind. So in terms of like a social permeation going on, in terms of our higher mind, we are obsessed with fairness. Anytime we see something that is unfair, we get really angry about it. Like, we get really up in arms, and regardless of whether or not it's true and whether or not it's legitimate, it's it's sort of one of those things where we need to rectify this. This isn't fair. And granted, don't get me wrong, there are plenty of sports fans that talk about the purity of the sport, needs to be fair, et cetera, et cetera. But I always like to kind of sit back and say that's cool and cute, but this is still a game and not a war. So and this actually speaks to what's actually occurring when we're talking about the overtime rules. Regulation is sort of your time. This is they have, in order for a game to be good, you have a certain amount of time that you play. These are the rules. They are as fair as possible, or completely fair, or whatever you consider to assuage people's mindsets about whether or not you even want to watch the game. And these leagues go ahead and create TV contracts, that they sell to, all these TV stations, and they're saying, hey, this is our game, this is how it works, this is for as long as it goes. It could go longer, but we have rules that mitigate it from going on too long. And people kind of fail to realize this, that it's still a game, and there are other players involved. This is more of the business angle of things, the public angle of things, more than just this one-on-one relationship. And this actually starts to speak more towards a Saturnian way of looking at things. It's because Saturn actually is the planet that has to deal with actual fairness. Now, but Saturn's a malefic, and Saturn, is usually associated with sort of like the unpleasant fairness of the world. That there are forces involved in these things that kind of put a dour idea in terms of what we would like from equality, and this is part of the reason why one of the signs that Saturn rules, Capricorn, directly squares Libra. They're kind of concerned with similar affairs, similar topics, but whereas Libra is ruled by Venus, which is about harmony, it's about balance, it's about equality. with Capricorn, which is associated with the 10th house, governments, big systems, maybe even businesses, things become a bit more practical. And so what occurred here is in the overtime rules, it's a very practical concept, right? It tries to be as fair as possible. It's not interested in sacrificing the game, but the purpose of the game has changed. The regulation time is now passed. You are into post-regulation, which now the goal of it is to determine a winner as quickly as possible. Why? Because TV contracts, stations are sitting back and saying, hey, I love the game. Sure, I love this, but I have local sponsors that want to get their advertisements out. They're going to lose money if this goes into 1, 2, 3 a.m. It's not fair to them. That's not what we agreed to, right? This is something a lot of sports fans aren't really 100% aware of. Players, even though it's super interesting and fun to have these great epic outings, but what happens if your game goes for another 30 minutes of actual play? Well, you just played a game and a half. Whoever wins at that point is going to be beaten and bloodied to death. That they're going to be at a major disadvantage going into the next week, and it's not going to be very fair to them at that point. Okay, well, but why is it that it's okay that this team that doesn't have a good defense loses? Well, because defense is a part of the game. This is as close to the spirit as we can get. I'm sorry if this doesn't sound great to you, but this is sort of the dour reality that occurs with Capricorn and Saturn. And so I just find this to be very interesting because we're up in arms. Everyone's talking about fairness, which is in line with what we've been seeing. With that. Libra on the cusp of the 9th house. Our higher minds are obsessed with equality. At the same time too, it's good to note that Capricorn in the age of Aquarius is sitting in the 12th house. So we are kind of, and maybe I'm wrong about this, but there's a bit of it where we're not as aware of the harshness of reality, the harshness of business, how things actually work and are achieved and are sustained. This is on the 12th house. This is on the this is that point where we are most blind to to what's supposed to be happening here. It doesn't help, amongst other things, that our public perception of the NFL has kind of gone the way it has gone with quarterbacks, but it's just an interesting point, I feel like. And obviously, for the record, yes, I am 100%. I love the overtime rules. I love it because it does really, it does embrace that Saturnian aspect of hey, we are, we got to do the best we can with what we got, and we can't just go this forever. But your average fan obviously doesn't like that, obviously doesn't care, obviously is going up in arms about whether or not this is good for the NFL. And obviously a lot of those people, too, are not really aware of how the business world really works. And, how we shift from that, over the next however many years, I don't really know. But and whether or not it's a big problem is its own thing. But I just kind of wanted to throw these thoughts out there. It's just... fascinating concept. Also, by the way, Tom Brady is the GOAT. Oh my God, 27-3, coming back and getting what he did. I mean, whether or not it's real, I don't really care. I don't think I'm going to see anything like that for the rest of my life. So, all right, that's it for this one, and we'll catch you on the next.